All right, everybody. Welcome back to another very special episode of Essence of Alexandria. I'm your host, John, and I have a very special guest, Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy, here to talk with us about idealism.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is something I'm passionate about.
Yeah, I remember watching your series on, I'm going to call it Inspiring Philosophy's Christian Idealism, because when I talked about this really early on, I had some people bring up links to something called Christian idealism, and it had nothing to do with what you were talking about. Um, so if you want to just say a quick little piece about that.
Yeah, I mean, is defined in multiple ways. I'm talking more about it in the metaphysical sense. The idea basically that all of reality is mind at its base level. So
Yeah.
to contrast it with physicalism and substance dualism, physicalism is the idea that all is matter, reduces to some sort of physical particles or physical substance. Substance dualism says all is mind and matter. So there's two substances, but idealism says no, all is just mind.
Hmm.
So everything reduces to mind or consciousness itself and information that is contingent upon it.
Yeah. I found it really fascinating. In your videos, you brought up the double slit experiment. That's kind of like a scientific evidence for um, idealism, right? That everything is mind or I've asked you clarifying questions in the past about information.
Hmm.
Is that an accurate is that an accurate kind of
I mean,
explanation of?
that's kind of a simple way to say it. That matter
Okay.
just reduces to information itself. And
Hmm.
then when you want more, people get into specifics like, what do you mean about information? So
Right.
I also say it's like qualia, for example. So if you have an apple in your hand, you can describe it as red, shiny, round, hard, smooth. These are all mental properties. These are mental sensations you're experiencing, like the way it looks, the color of it, the way it feels, the way it tastes. And so we say that matter reduces to basically mental information like that. We don't need to posit a physical substance to explain the apple. It's fully explainable in terms of its mental quality.
Okay. So let me try and wrap my. So we don't. Are you saying we don't need an apple physically present? I mean, obviously we don't need an apple physically present to describe it. Um, let me. I'm trying to think because like there's something that's not clicking about that example. Uh, because you're not saying it's not real. I know that.
Correct. And we're not saying it's not real.
Yeah.
We're saying that it's real more in an informational sense, not in the terms of actual substance there. So
Hmm.
think of like if you're in a video game. This is an analogy I use. You go through the world of a video game and you pick up an apple in there. It's not a real apple like it
Right.
is in our world in a comparative sense. It's only basically information generated by the video game. Likewise, I argue that the apples in this world are just information generated by underlying more fundamental reality. So it's like living in the matrix to some degree. It's
Hmm.
when Cypher says if I put this steak in my mouth, it's going to tell me it's juicy and delicious, but I know it's just all this information. Same kind of idea. It's just that we live in a world where all that exists would be mind and the information that we process.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Now I think where I was getting tripped up is the use of the word substance to mean material thing. Because the way I had when I was thinking about it, formulating it, trying to digest your series, which I will link in the description of the video. Um, I had used the word substance to describe the information that everything is made out of. Uh,
Hmm.
I'm not a formally trained philosopher or scientist, so I can kind of get confused on terms like that.
Yeah, I understand. That's why I use analogies like
Hmm.
movies or video games to help explain it because that tends to help people more.
Yeah. So with the idea of like it being a movie, how would that play with concepts like human free will if we're just uh as you have said in your series, thoughts in the mind of God.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. For one, I don't think that we are just computer programs.
Right.
So I would say we also are fundamentally conscious beings. We're not just information.
Mm-hmm.
Matter is information, but you and I are we reduce to conscious beings at our base essence. So that's what I would say. So God creates other little minds, so to speak, that can
Mm-hmm.
uh, operate and move throughout reality. And in that sense, we're made in His image, so to speak.
Oh, okay. That's really fascinating. Let's can we explore that a little more then?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's really like so like we are I guess we'd have to go into mind then, wouldn't we? Like what is
Go
that?
into mind.
Yeah, the question of
Yeah.
mind. What is mind? Cuz that's
Yes.
that's always really fun and
So
super simple and easy for everyone to understand.
yeah, so I say that we are minds, and then the sense that we are
Mm-hmm.
conscious beings.
Right.
So you know you're conscious, you experience the world around you, you're self-aware, you have your own will. That is what I would define as a mind. And then I would define soul differently.
Mm-hmm.
So a soul is a collection of your thoughts, your emotions, your dreams, your memories, your goals, your dispositions. So you are a mind building a soul throughout your life. You're building up a soul every time you add new memories. It adds to your soul. So we are all minds building souls.
Okay. That's so soul building is like the building of our moral character through experience and like you said dispositions and all that. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, cool. That's really interesting. So things like what do they call them? Theodicies?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, moral.
Theodicy. Yes.
Yeah.
No. Soul building theodicy.
Yeah. Okay, that's so those kind of things going on those kind of things experiencing hardships and how we respond to them that uh and kind of adjusting our perspective on things, I guess. That's what you consider the soul.
Yeah, I would say it's more of a defining soul in an Aristotelian sense than a Platonic sense. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say that, we are all minds building souls.
Okay, that's actually new and really interesting, and I'm glad I learned. Now, as far as my audience might not be super familiar with Aristotelian versus Platonic, can we give us, if it's possible, to give a quick overview of those so they can kind of get the difference?
Yeah, I don't have anything in front of me, but I'll just give kind of a rough estimate. So
Yeah.
Plato talked about souls and sort of there's like some sort of material essence that sort of leaves this world and goes to like a more perfect realm when we die, and then we take on a physical body. Aristotle talked about the soul more in the sense that I'm talking about it, like it's a collection of all the information we gain throughout this life.
Okay, so uh, do you treat the mind more in a Platonic sense then, as the way you define it? Because that's, I obviously we're dealing with super basic definitions, so it can
Yeah, yeah.
map onto that simple definition. But once you really explore Platonism, your idea of the mind might not work out well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that my definition of mind would be more similar to what Plato was talking about. I just make that distinction between mind
Mm-hmm.
and soul because I think we do build souls up over time, and
Yeah.
I do think we are fundamental conscious minds that are building these souls. So it's, I think we need both.
Okay. Cool. Um. Now, a lot of your series focuses on science and the science behind this. Things like I mentioned earlier, the double slit experiment. Um, can you give a quick explanation of that for our audience?
Yeah, well, I mean, when we start to study the quantum world, the most fundamental level of our reality, we find some very interesting aspects with regards to it.
Mm-hmm.
People were trying to figure out, do particles behave as waves or as little particles? And so they ran something called the double slit experiment, where they would shoot light through a double slit. Now, when they shot it through, they noticed it acted as waves. So waves would sort of go through and then interact with each other, and then they create a rippling effect on the film on the backside. So like, okay, light acts as a wave, but then they shot it through a single slit and it acted as particles, and so they were a little confused there. So they set up a measuring device at the double slit, and surprisingly, the photons acted as particles. So when they were being measured, they acted as particles. When they were not being measured, they acted as waves. So this confused physicists, and so we get the beginning of the study of quantum mechanics. And so what the standard Copenhagen interpretation said, which was that an observer, when he acts upon a particle, he determines its outcome. So depending on how we measure something, measure the particle will determine its outcome. We can either measure the velocity of the particle or the position. We cannot measure both. And when we measure, it has certain properties that it wouldn't have if we had measured it the other way. So this was a profound implication. And so physicists like John von Neumann, Henry Stapp, even Anton Zellinger to a degree, have argued this sort of leads to some sort of idealistic understanding of reality. Anton Zellinger said, what we perceive as reality now depends on our earlier decision of what to measure. So in a sense, the observer is sort of acting with physical reality and determining what it will be to some degree, not entirely. It's not like we can will things into existence, but there is some degree in which the way we measure determines the outcome. So this leads to an idealistic understanding of reality. Matter seems to be dependent on mind, not the other way around. We
Mhm.
are sort of bringing about physical reality depending on what we observe slash measure. Uh, and so that leads to more of an idealistic understanding of reality if the way we measure something determines what will physically be there. So it's a very interesting understanding of matter. But this is numerous quantum mechanical experiments have basically confirmed the same conclusion.
All that it observation mind has sorry, I'm stuttering over my words. That mind has more influence over matter than the inverse.
Yeah, yeah, we seem to have some sort of strong influence
Mm-hmm.
over matter. Now, again, we don't will things into existence.
Right.
Werner Heisenberg talked about it. Like, we determine, like, we can decide to measure the particle's position, but nature tells us the position. We don't get to determine where the position of the particle
Right.
is. So we have to be careful we don't go into like new age nonsense and think that we can sort of control matter with our minds. We're not. We're participating with reality. We're not controlling it.
Yeah. Yeah. It does solve what's called from it does solve what's often called the interaction problem though of substance dualism, which is um as you explained earlier, substance dualism is the idea that the physical world and there's a physical world and a spiritual world, and they're made of kind of a different stuff. Um, and there's what some is it a philosophical or a scientific objection or both?
It's more of good question. I guess it depends on how it's worded. It tends to be more of a philosophical objection.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that like if there were two substances and
Right.
one was sort of interacting with matter, I would be adding energy to the system. But the law of conservation says you cannot matter within the physical universe. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So if you have some sort of outside substance like mind interacting with matter, it's always adding um, new amounts of energy into the system. Now, this isn't a problem on idealism because idealism basically says we're not adding new energy into the system. We're just sort of manipulating that which is already there.
Right. Right. But it can well the way I had originally understood it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was that the spiritual world is mind, right? As well as like our own mind. So things like angels interacting with physical stuff is perfectly reasonable on your view.
Yeah, because it's not like there's two substances
Yeah.
interacting. So there's that idea. It depends on how the interaction objection is worded. Some will try to say like, if there are two substances, how do they interact unless they share a common property?
Yeah. It could also explain. I don't know if you're this is going to get a little silly and I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but have you watched or have you listened to any of Jimmy Akin's podcast? He's a Catholic apologist.
No, I've not listened to any of this podcast.
Okay, well, most of what he does, at least most of what I listen to, I shouldn't say most of what he does because he works for Catholic Answers. But I listen to his podcast called Mysterious World, and he does a lot of stuff on things like remote viewing. And it's this is going to sound so silly. I don't know if you've, especially if you haven't explored it at all. But on Idealism, remote viewing is way more explainable than on substance dualism stuff. I recommend that. It's really interesting. And when I first listened to his podcast, I went into it going, no, remote viewing's complete nonsense. But it's serious enough that most of the remote viewing research that is published that Jimmy Akin goes over is done by the United States Army. Or was it Air Force? It's done by our military.
Oh, yeah, I've not heard any on it, but it sounds interesting.
Yeah, I recommend it. I just thought it was really interesting because it's mind stuff. And it's like, oh man, it's all about observation and mind. It's a really loose tangent, but I thought it'd be fun to go on for a few seconds there. So with this view, kind of moving over to the theological realm, what would you say?
I don't know much about it.
Oh, sorry. I was getting back on topic, away from remote viewing. What would you say to people that object to your idealistic view, and in favor of substance dualism, from a theological perspective, less from the science one?
So,
Oh,
can you say that again? You're really breaking up.
yeah. Okay. Are you good? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to people in the realm of theology, that would object to your view in favor of the classical substance dualism?
Yeah, so I would say idealism is much simpler. We're positing one substance over two. And again, it gets around the interaction problem quite easier. So it's a more parsimonious explanation. And again, there's no reason to posit a physical substance apart from mind. Again, we don't experience anything but a mental reality. Everything you experience is qualia, sounds, tastes, sensations. All of these are mental in nature. So again, I go back to the example I gave earlier of the apple. When you taste it, uh, that's just on like physicalism or substance dualism. That's just the electrical signals from the tongue hitting the brain and telling you you're tasting an apple, and then you're experiencing the mental sensation of that. But you're not actually. But the taste is not actually a part of the apple itself. That's something else entirely. That's something that only happens when it interacts with a mind. The idealist says just posit a world that we experience, a mental world. So all we experience is the fact that we are conscious agents, and we experience all these mental properties around us. So sights, smells, sensations, tastes, all of these are mental in nature. We don't need to posit a physical substance beyond them. All of it can just reduce to information. So David Hume, for example, was a philosopher. He talked about bundle theory. And idealists have used his work without going so far as to say that conscious agents are bundles. But if you just use his understanding in terms of physical objects, it makes sense. So again, the apple is just a bundle of various properties. There's no physical substance there. All we're positing is basically that physical objects are a bundle of properties. But if you take away the color of the apple, the sensation of it, the feeling of it, what's left there to describe? Well, nothing. Everything you use to describe the apples can be terms of mental sensations, qualia, not actual uh, substances or a substance itself. So if we basically live in a mental reality and everything we experience is mental properties, why posit another substance beyond mind? It's completely unparsimonious to do that.
Fair enough. That's pretty good. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know too much about the strict link between substance dualism. I know that, like, I have a lot of friends who or I should say, I know of a lot of people that have drifted into physicalism with their Christian theology, but I find that particularly difficult with the existence of spirits.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think Christian physicalism is a worthy position to take, given how many problems it has.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is actually going to be a shorter episode. That's kind of just a really great basic starter episode. My co-host Megan, she wasn't feeling well, and I kind of originally had her planned to have her in here and have questions of her own. But thank you very much for the respected Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy. His ministry is a really good one. Highly recommend checking out his YouTube channel and following his socials. His shorts that he's been producing lately are very funny, and I really appreciate them.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, have a wonderful day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on Rumble and YouTube. And I promise one of these days I will get this up on audio platforms. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.